Have you ever hailed a taxi and wondered what the weirdest thing the driver has ever had to deal with? And trust me, you won't look at your next cab ride the same way again. Let's start with a real head-scratcher from the UK. Picture this. You flag down a classic black cab in London. You hop in, tell the driver your destination, and then they turn around and ask, "Excuse me, but do you happen to have the plague?" I'm not joking. Under a law called the Public Health Control of Disease Act of 1984, it's illegal for a person who knows they have a notifiable disease, which historically included things like the plague or smallpox, to enter a taxi without first informing the driver. The driver then has the right to refuse the ride. If they do agree to take you, they are legally required to disinfect the taxi immediately afterward and report it to a health officer. So, next time you have a bit of a sniffle, just hope your driver doesn't get suspicious and start asking about bubonic symptoms. But it doesn't stop with ancient diseases. Let's talk about our furry friends. Or, in this case, our not-so-furry, rabid friends. In the UK, it is explicitly illegal for a taxi driver to transport a rabid dog. Now, you might be thinking, well, duh. Who in their right mind would try to put a rabid dog in a taxi? And that's a fair question. But the law exists, which means at some point, somewhere, this was probably an issue. It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Someone, in a state of panic, trying to rush their foaming-at-the-mouth Fido to the vet in a cab. The law specifies rabid dogs, which makes you wonder about other questionable animal passengers. A non-rabbed but very angry badger. A particularly grumpy goose. The law is silent on those. And while we're on the topic of animals, here's another one for you. In some parts of Australia, taxi drivers are required by law to carry a bale of hay in their trunk. Yes, a bale of hay. This law dates back to the horse and buggy era, when taxis were, well, horse-drawn carriages. The hay was for the horse, of course. The horses are long gone, replaced by horsepower of a different kind. But in some places, the law was never updated. So, somewhere out there, a modern taxi driver could technically be fined for not having emergency horse food in their Toyota Camry. Imagine trying to explain that to a passenger when you're loading their luggage. Sorry, gotta make room for the hay. It's the law. Let's travel over to the United States, where things get just as strange. In the city of Cleveland, Ohio, it used to be illegal to ride on the roof of a taxi. Again, this feels like a rule that shouldn't need to be a rule. It seems like something that common sense and the basic instinct for self-preservation would cover. But the existence of the law implies that, at some point, taxi surfing was enough of a trend to warrant legal action. It conjures images of people trying to get a cheap thrill, or maybe just a really windy haircut on their way across town. Thankfully, this is one law that seems to be universally ignored today, mostly because nobody is trying to do it. Now, what about the drivers themselves? They're not exempt from weird regulations. In the UK, for a very long time, London cabbies were expected to maintain a certain standard of dress. This wasn't just about looking neat. Some old regulations specified that they must wear a cap and be clean and tidy. But here's the fun part. There was also a rule that they had to have a good and sufficient knowledge of London. This is the famous knowledge test, which is still in place and is incredibly difficult, requiring drivers to memorize thousands of streets and landmarks. But back in the day, the rules were more vaguely worded. What exactly is good and sufficient? It was up to the discretion of the licensing authorities, making it a bit of a mystery. Let's swing back to health regulations, because they are just too good to ignore. Besides the plague, what else could get you kicked out of a cab? Well, in many places, laws were written to prevent the spread of any contagious disease. The wording is often broad, covering everything from tuberculosis to measles. The driver has a duty not just to themselves, but to every subsequent passenger who gets in the car. It makes you think about how our views on public health and transportation have evolved. Today, we might see a driver wipe down a credit card machine or offer hand sanitizer. 100 years ago, they might have been legally obligated to refuse service to someone with a bad cough. It's the same principle, just with a much more dramatic, old-timey disease. And what if you expire during the trip? It's a morbid thought, but the law has it covered. There are complex rules about what a taxi driver is supposed to do if a passenger passes away mid. In many jurisdictions, they are not allowed to simply drop the body off at the destination. They must contact the authorities immediately. But here's the weird part. In some old statutes, there was a debate about whether the meter should keep running. Can you imagine that conversation with the family? That'll be $45.50 for the ride, plus a surcharge for the inconvenience. It's a grim but fascinating legal gray area that highlights how laws have to account for every possible and impossible scenario. So why do these strange laws still exist? Mostly, it's a case of legislative inertia. It takes time and effort to go through old law books and repeal outdated statutes. As long as they aren't causing any real problems, they're often just left there, gathering dust. They become legal relics, funny footnotes in the history of transportation. No one is actively enforcing the bale of hay rule. And taxi drivers aren't really interrogating passengers about smallpox. But these laws serve as a wonderful reminder of a bygone era. They tell a story about the concerns and daily life of people in the past. From worrying about infectious diseases to dealing with the practical needs of horse-drawn transport. Next time you get into a taxi, take a moment to appreciate the silent, unwritten contract between you and the driver. You agree not to bring any rabid animals, and they agree not to ask if you have the plague. It's a system built on centuries of trial, error, and some truly bizarre legislation. These laws may be funny, but they show how rules adapt, or fail to adapt, to a changing world. They are a snapshot of history, hidden in plain sight, riding along with us on our daily commutes. Thanks for joining me on this weird and wonderful legal road trip. If you know of any other strange taxi laws, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more dives into the curious corners of our world. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.